Ever get that feeling like, wow, our lives depend on so much software that, we didn't write? Well, today we're going to dive deep into software supply chain security. And we've got this really cool report from Reversing Labs to help us out. It's called the State of Software Supply Chain Security 2024. And what I really like about it is it's not just theory. They've combined real-world attack analysis with data from their own platform, like they have this software risk analysis platform. So we're getting insights into both how attackers are thinking and, the actual vulnerabilities they're going after.
Yeah, it's like having that attacker and defender perspective. It's a really powerful combination to see the full picture.
Okay, so one thing that just jumps out right away from this report is how much these software supply chain attacks are changing. I mean, remember when we used to think of these as super rare, like something only nation states could pull off?
Yeah, it used to be like this exclusive club, super sophisticated actors, but the landscape has definitely shifted. While nation states are still a threat, the barrier to entry has dropped significantly.
Right.
We're seeing a way wider range of attackers with different levels of sophistication getting in on the action.
And the report actually uses the 3CX desktop app hack as a perfect example of this. I mean, that was a big one, right? It really shook things up.
Oh yeah, for sure. It was a huge wake-up call. What was so alarming was how subtle it was. They were able to slip malicious code into files that were digitally signed. So it totally bypassed those traditional security checks. It was like they found a blind spot.
So if I remember correctly, they tampered with the D3D compiler and FFmpeg libraries and injected code that was activated when the app ran. But if our current security tools can't even flag something like that, I mean, what does that say about, our overall security posture?
Yeah, it raises some serious questions about visibility. Like if attackers can hide within legitimate software, we have to rethink our whole approach to security.
Okay, so we've got attackers getting more creative, but it's not just about these individual attacks. The report also highlighted a surge in these malicious open source packages, particularly on NPM and PyPI.
Absolutely. That's a trend we're watching very closely. In 2023 alone, Reversing Labs detected over 11,000 malicious packages across those platforms. That's a 28% increase from the previous year. And it's not just the sheer volume, it's the tactics that are getting more and more clever.
Yeah, that scale is just mind-boggling, 11,000.
Yeah.
But the tactics really are something. The report mentions this case of the AbQuery's NPM package, which used typo squatting. How sneaky is that?
Oh yeah, typo squatting is a classic. It's social engineering, really, taking advantage of human error.
So you're a developer, right? You need a specific package, and you're typing quickly, and you need AbQuery, but you accidentally type in AbQueries, and you download it thinking it's the real deal, not realizing it's a malicious imposter.
Right, and they make these malicious packages look as legitimate as possible. They often mimic the real popular packages. It's really easy to trick developers.
And even worse, this AbQueries package had obfuscated code, like they were trying to hide in plain sight. But isn't obfuscated code a red flag in the first place?
It can be, but it's becoming more and more common even in legitimate packages, so it's not as reliable an indicator as it used to be.
So not a foolproof way to spot the bad guys. And then this report talks about an even more concerning trend, where it's not just hosting malicious downloads or stealing data, it's about delivering malware directly through the software supply chain.
It's definitely a disturbing evolution, like weaponizing these platforms
Yep.
to deliver malware straight into a developer's systems.
Like the case with this node hide console Windows NPM package. So this one also used typo squatting, disguised as a legit package, but it delivered this R77 rootkit.
Oh yeah, R77, that one's nasty. It gets deep into your system, really hard to detect and remove.
Yeah, it's like giving the attackers keys to the kingdom. So we're seeing an escalation in both frequency and sophistication. But what I also find fascinating is this concept of the democratization of these supply chain attacks. It used to be the domain of elite hackers, but now it seems like anyone with some technical skills can launch these attacks.
Yeah, that's the scary part. The tools and techniques are becoming more accessible, which is lowering that barrier to entry.
And they highlighted Operation Brain Leeches as a prime example of this trend.
Oh yeah. Operation Brain Leeches was interesting. They were using NPM packages to host these phishing kits targeting Microsoft 365 users. So it was a two-pronged approach. Some packages for traditional supply chain attacks, others used for phishing.
Talk about covering all the bases. It's like they were throwing everything at the wall and seeing what sticks.
And that brings us to another interesting shift. It seems like there's a move from NPM to PyPI as the preferred platform for hosting these malicious packages. It's been a really dramatic shift. In the first 9 months of 2023 alone, Reversing Labs saw a 400% increase in malicious packages found on PyPI compared to all of 2022. During that same time, malicious packages on NPM actually decreased by 43%.
Well, hold on. A 400% increase. What's driving a change like that?
Well, it seems like the bad guys are just following the trends. Python's popularity has exploded, so naturally they're going to focus their efforts there. They go where the targets are.
Makes sense. But is it just about Python's popularity, or are there other factors?
Oh, there are definitely other reasons PyPI is attractive. One reason is that Python offers some distinct advantages for malware authors. For example, it uses this compiled bytecode, PYC, which can evade detection by security tools that focus on scanning source code.
So they're using the language's own features to their advantage. Clever, but also pretty devious. And the report mentioned that Phishik2 package, which exploited this exact
It's
thing,
a constant game of cat and mouse.
a digital arms race. But these changes aren't limited to just the platforms themselves. We're also seeing a shift in the types of malware found on both PyPI and NPM.
Definitely seeing some trends there.
Like what? What are we seeing?
Well, on PyPI, there's been a huge surge in what's called downloader malware. It's actually increased more than 20-fold from 2022 to 2023.
Downloader malware. So what does that do exactly?
Think of it as the first stage of a multi-stage attack. It's designed to download additional malicious payloads onto the infected system.
So like a Trojan horse.
Yeah.
Sneaking in and opening the door for others.
Exactly. And what's interesting is that the malware delivered in these later stages often isn't written in Python, which is likely an attempt to avoid detection by tools looking for Python-based threats.
So sneaky but smart. How about NPM? Any similar trends there?
Yeah, NPM's a bit different. While the overall number of malicious packages has actually gone down, there's been a noticeable increase in what are called info stealer packages.
So info stealers, I mean, it's in the name, right? They steal information.
Pretty much. They're designed to siphon off sensitive data, things like login credentials, financial info, even intellectual property.
Sounds like a nightmare. But what's interesting is the report mentions that many of these info stealer packages on NPM seem to be either like proof of concept malware or tools used for security assessments.
Yeah, that's possible. They could be developed by security researchers or ethical hackers for legitimate purposes, like penetration testing or demonstrating vulnerabilities.
They're not necessarily malicious, more like experimental.
Right. But there are other concerning trends on NPM too. The report mentions the presence of spam and these potentially unwanted applications, or PUAs.
So those are more annoying than dangerous, I guess.
They can be both.
Mm-hmm.
They might not be explicitly harmful, but they can gather info, track user behavior, deliver unwanted ads. They're often seen as like precursors to more malicious campaigns, like they're testing the water, seeing what they can get away with.
So even seemingly harmless packages can be cause for concern, like beware of geeks bearing gifts.
That's a good one. And, speaking of these unexpected trends, the report also highlights this rise of protestware on platforms like NPM.
Protestware, what's that?
It's this category of packages that are designed to promote a specific political or social cause. The report mentions E2 Ikarev and Sweatercomb as examples.
So it shows how these platforms can be used for activism, but it also raises questions about the impact on software security and trust, right?
Definitely. While protestware might not be inherently malicious, it can disrupt functionality, create security risks, and erode trust.
So it's not just about malicious intent. Well-intentioned actions can have consequences too.
Exactly. Which brings us to a critical takeaway. We can't just blindly trust open source code anymore. Developers need to be really vigilant, carefully vetting packages, understanding the risks. We need to adopt a security-first mindset.
So like a new era of software security, where trust needs to be earned, not assumed.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay, so we've covered a lot. From these evolving tactics of attackers to the rise of these malicious packages and this shift towards platforms like PyPI, it's clear the software supply chain is becoming more complex and vulnerable, and there's no easy fix.
It's a really multifaceted problem. Requires a multi-layered approach. But before we get into that, let's take a closer look at another persistent issue. Developer secrets leaks.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one, like leaving the keys to your kingdom under the welcome mat.
Exactly. And those leaks are way more common than you might think.
Yeah, I mean, you'd think developers would be extra careful with their passwords and keys. But this report paints a very different picture.
It does. And the consequences of a leak can be devastating. Give attackers access to sensitive databases, financial accounts. The Circle CI hack at the beginning of the year was a perfect example.
Yeah, that was a major incident. I mean, Circle CI is used by so many for continuous integration and delivery.
Huge potential fallout. And it shows that even well-established companies can fall victim to this. And Reversing Labs actually found leaked secrets related to Slack AWS, Google, GitHub, Azure. This isn't just one company. It's everywhere.
So this is not an isolated incident, but how are these leaks happening? Is it deliberate or is it more human error?
Usually a combination of factors. Sometimes it's a simple oversight, like a developer forgetting to remove a test API key before pushing code to a public repo. Other times it's a lack of awareness of best practices.
So not always intentional, but the impact is just as damaging.
Absolutely. And the report highlights NPM as the platform with the most leaks, a whopping 77% of the over 40,000 secrets detected.
Wow, that's a lot. But what kind of secrets are we talking about?
On NPM, the most common leaks were things like encrypted and embedded private keys and web service access keys. On PyPI, it was plaintext credentials within network protocol strings.
Okay, I'm no expert. Why are those plaintext credentials so risky?
Well, it comes down to insecure handling of sensitive data, like transmitting credentials over unencrypted channels. It's like writing your bank account details on a postcard and mailing it.
Yikes. Okay, and what about leaked private keys? What can those do?
Private keys are like the keys to your house. They encrypt and decrypt information, and if they fall into the wrong hands, it's game over. They can impersonate you, access your data, take control of your systems.
So it's not just about stealing data, it's about control.
It is. And they can be found as standalone files, but also embedded within other files. Makes them really hard to find and mitigate.
So it's starting to sound overwhelming, like threats are everywhere.
You're right, it can feel that way. But the more we understand these threats, the better we can defend against them. Reports like this one are so valuable.
So not panicking, just being informed and proactive. Which reminds me, we talked about OpenAI and how it's a surprising source of leaks. I mean, they're at the forefront of AI and machine learning. You'd think they'd have a handle on security.
It is ironic. Shows that even the most cutting-edge tech is vulnerable. For OpenAI, the wide distribution of their API keys seems to be a big factor.
So it's not their tech, it's how developers are using and managing it. Security is a shared responsibility.
Exactly. Everyone from developers to organizations plays a role.
Okay, so far it's all been doom and gloom. Are there any bright spots?
Well, the report does highlight some positive developments. Things like increased regulatory scrutiny and a push for greater transparency and accountability.
That's good to hear. It sounds like policymakers are taking this seriously.
They are. Things like the Movie attacks and the SEC lawsuit against SolarWinds have been big wake-up calls.
And those were huge. Movie affected millions of people.
They're setting a clear message. Software producers are responsible for their products and the whole supply chain.
So raising the bar. What can we expect to see in 2024 in terms of regulation?
We'll probably see more guidance from government bodies. The report mentions the National Cybersecurity Strategy and the NIS2 Directive. These aim to establish clearer standards and promote secure development.
Those sound pretty comprehensive. What kind of impact will these regulations have?
It's a big step towards what they call a post-trust software supply chain. Blind trust just isn't an option. Software producers will need to demonstrate their commitment to security.
So actions, not just words.
Right. The scrutiny is good, forces everyone to step up.
Sounds like we're moving toward a more secure ecosystem.
It's a shared responsibility. We all have a role to play.
Okay, so this has been a fascinating and maybe a little scary look at software supply chain security. Feels like we just scratched the surface.
Always more to learn. And it's constantly changing.
Before we wrap up, I'd love to get your take on what's next. What are the key trends, and what can our listeners do to stay ahead of the curve? Okay, so we've talked about this idea of a post-trust software supply chain, where you just can't blindly trust software anymore. So what does that really look like going forward? I mean, what are some of the key trends we should all be watching? And how can our listeners stay ahead of the game?
Well, like we've been saying, things are constantly changing. But even with all that change, there are some things that'll stick around. The first one is that this back and forth, this cat and mouse game between attackers and defenders, it's just going to get more intense.
Yeah. I mean, as security gets better, the attackers will just find new ways to get around it, right?
Exactly. So we can expect to see even more sophisticated attacks. Things like AI-powered attacks, more targeted campaigns, exploiting that human element even more.
Which brings us to the second trend, that human element. You mentioned that even with all this tech, a lot of times it comes down to human error.
It's the weakest link.
Yeah.
And the attackers know it. So yeah, we need to keep investing in better security tools. But we can't forget about the people. We need to educate developers, promote secure coding, and build a strong security culture within organizations.
So it's about making security a core principle, not just something you tack on at the end.
That's it. And this actually leads us to the third trend, which is a positive one. The rise of security as code.
Okay, security as code, what does that even mean?
It's the idea that you're integrating security practices and tools right into the development process, using the same principles as we do for writing and managing code. So like automating security checks, making it easier for developers to spot and fix those problems early on.
So you build security in from the beginning.
Exactly. And this has a lot of benefits. Helps you find and fix things faster, less human error, ultimately more secure software.
Sounds good. Any specific tools that developers can use for this security as code thing?
Oh yeah, tons of them. There are these things called SAS tools, static application security testing, which can analyze code for vulnerabilities.
Hmm.
And then there's DAST, dynamic application security testing, those test running applications for flaws, and even IAST, interactive application security testing. Those combine elements of both.
Wow, so many acronyms.
We love our acronyms, haha. But the point is there are tools out there to help.
So security as code is one trend. Anything else on the horizon?
Yeah, another big one is SBOMs, software bill of materials.
Okay, another acronym, but seriously, what are those?
Basically, an SBOM is like an ingredient list for your software. It lists all the components, all the things it depends on.
So it's like a recipe, but for software.
Exactly.
Right.
And this is important because it gives organizations more visibility. If there's a problem with a component, they can use the SBOM to see what systems might be affected.
So it's about knowing what's inside your software so you can make smart decisions about security.
That's it. And this is becoming more and more important with all these supply chain attacks. Some governments are even requiring SBOMs now.
So it's becoming a law. Wow. Okay, so we've got those sophisticated attacks, human error, security as code, SBOMs. Anything else we should be watching out for?
Well, one more thing is the growing use of AI, both for attack and defense. Attackers are using it to make more sophisticated attacks, while defenders are using it to automate security tasks, analyze threats, and respond faster.
So a double-edged sword? Depends who's using it.
Yeah, it's going to be a key thing to watch in the next few years.
Okay, so we've covered a ton today. The threats, the vulnerabilities, and how to make things more secure. It's a lot, and it changes all the time. But the good news is we can do things to stay ahead of the game.
We can. And remember, knowledge is power.
To sum it all up, what are the key things you want our listeners to remember?
Okay, so first, don't get complacent. These attacks are happening, they're getting worse, and they can cause serious damage.
So it's not if, but when, right?
Exactly. Second, security is everyone's responsibility. We all need to work together, developers, organizations, even individual users.
So a collaborative approach.
And finally, don't be afraid to ask questions. Stay informed. There's
Yeah.
so many resources out there.
Great advice. Well, this has been an incredible look into software supply chain security.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. And remember, stay curious, stay vigilant, and stay safe. Okay, so we've been talking about this post-trust software supply chain, where you just can't blindly trust software. But what does that actually look like? Practically speaking, what trends should we be watching out for? And how can our listeners stay ahead of the curve?
Well, like we said, this landscape is always changing, but there are some fundamentals that'll always be there.
Yeah.
Like this back and forth between attackers and defenders. That's only going to intensify.
Right, so as we make security better, the attackers will find new ways to get around it.
Exactly. So we can expect even more sophisticated attacks, think AI-powered attacks, more targeted campaigns, and even more exploitation of us, the human factor.
Which brings us right back to that human element. Even with all the technology, it seems like human mistakes still play a big role.
It's the weakest link. Attackers know that. So yes, we need better tools and technology, but we need to focus on the people too. Educating developers, promoting good coding practices, making sure organizations have a strong security culture.
So it's about making security a core part of the process.
Right, from the beginning. And that actually leads into the third trend, which is a positive one, this idea of security as code.
Okay, security as code. I've heard that term, but what does it actually mean?
So basically, you're integrating security practices and tools directly into how you develop software, using the same principles as you do for writing and managing code, like automating security checks. So it's easier for developers to catch and fix problems early on.
So baking security in from the start.
Exactly. And there are so many benefits. You find and fix things faster, reduce those human errors, and you end up with much more secure software.
I like it. Are there specific tools that developers can use for this security as code thing?
Oh yeah, tons. You've got things like SAS tools, which stands for Static Application Security Testing. They can analyze code for vulnerabilities. Then there's DAST, Dynamic Application Security Testing. That tests running applications to see if there are any security holes. And then you've got IAST, Interactive application security testing, which combines elements of both SAST and DAST for a more complete analysis.
Wow, so many acronyms.
Yeah, we love our acronyms, but the point is there are tools out there to help.
Okay, so security as code is one thing to keep an eye on. What else is coming down the pipeline?
Another big one is SBOMs, which stands for Software Bill of Materials.
Okay, another acronym. But really, what are SBOMs?
Think of it like an ingredient list for your software. It tells you all the components that were used to build it, everything it depends on.
So like a recipe, but for software.
Exactly. And having this transparency is so important because it helps organizations understand the risks. Like, if there's a known vulnerability in a certain component, the SBOM can tell them which systems might be affected so they can fix the problem.
So it's about knowing what's inside your software so you can make informed decisions about security.
Right. And this is becoming more and more important as these supply chain attacks become more common. In fact, some governments are even starting to require SBOMs for certain types of software.
So it's becoming the law. That's interesting. Okay, so we've got sophisticated attacks, the human factor, security as code, and SBOMs. Anything else we should be thinking about?
Well, one more trend is the increasing use of AI. And this goes for both sides, the attackers and the defenders.
Right, because AI can be used for good or for bad.
Exactly. Attackers are using AI to make more sophisticated and targeted attacks, while the good guys are using it to automate security, analyze threats, and respond faster.
It's a bit of a double-edged sword.
It is, and it's going to be a really important area to watch.
Okay, well, we've covered a lot today, from the changing landscape of attacks to the things we can do to protect ourselves.
It's a lot, and it's constantly evolving, but the good news is that we can stay ahead of the game.
So to wrap things up, what are the key takeaways you want our listeners to remember?
The first one is don't be complacent. These attacks are real, they're getting worse, and they can have a huge impact.
So we need to be ready.
Absolutely. The second one is that security is everyone's responsibility. We all need to work together. From developers to organizations to individual users, we all have a role to play.
So it's about being proactive and working together.
And the last thing is, don't be afraid to ask questions and stay informed. There are so many resources out there.
That's great advice. Well, this has been a really insightful look at software supply chain security. Thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And to all our listeners out there, stay curious, stay vigilant, and stay safe.